the heart of London, a diplomat lies dead, strangled by a silk scarf in his own embassy. Was it his secretive aide, hiding treasonous documents, his lonely wife, haunted by unspoken truths, the loyal driver, guarding more than he admits, or the enigmatic foreign envoy, weaving a web of deceit? Join Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a deadly tapestry of espionage, betrayal and murder in the Strangled Diplomat, where every clue is a thread and every secret could be fatal. Chapter 1. The Silent Embassy. The fog hung low over London, draping the Valorian embassy in a shroud of damp, grey mist. The building, a stately Georgian edifice in Belgravia, stood with an air of quiet dignity, its tall windows reflecting nothing but the swirling gloom. Inside, however, a different kind of silence reigned, one born not of serenity but of sudden, violent death. Sir Reginald Harrow, Valoria's distinguished diplomat, had been found that morning in his private suite on the 3rd floor, his life extinguished by a silk scarf knotted with cruel precision around his throat. The discovery had sent a shiver through the embassy staff, their usual efficiency replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. Miss Jane Marple, that unassuming spinster from St. Mary Mead, was not a stranger to such whispers. She was staying nearby with her dear friend, Lady Beatrice Compton, whose townhouse overlooked the embassy's manicured gardens. Over breakfast, Lady Beatrice, with her characteristic flair for gossip, relayed the news, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Strangled, Jane, in his own rooms. The police are there now, poking about. They say it's quite the scandal. Miss Marple's mild blue eyes flickered with interest, though her hands continued their gentle work on a pale pink shawl, the knitting needles clicking like a metronome. How dreadful, she said softly. And yet, Beatrice, how very curious. By noon, Lady Beatrice's connections, her late husband had been a miner. Diplomat secured an invitation for Miss Marple to visit the embassy under the guise of offering condolences. The police, led by Inspector Crane, a tall man with a sharp jaw and sharper instincts, welcomed her presence with polite skepticism. Miss Marple, he said, shaking her hand, Lady Beatrice speaks highly of your insight. His tone suggested he placed little stock in the observations of an elderly lady. But Miss Marple merely smiled, her expression as serene as a vicarage garden. The embassy's interior was a study in opulence. Polished marble floors, gilt-framed portraits of Valorian dignitaries, and chandeliers that gleamed even in the dim light. Inspector Crane led Miss Marple to Sir Reginald's suite, a spacious set of rooms dominated by heavy velvet drapes and a mahogany desk strewn with papers. The body had been removed, but the scene remained untouched, preserved for investigation. On a side table lay the murder weapon, a silk scarf, delicately embroidered with peonies, its beauty at odds with its grim purpose. A lady's scarf, Inspector Crane remarked, his eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the door, where Lady Eleanor Harrow, the diplomat's widow, might soon appear. Miss Marple bent closer, her spectacles glinting as she studied the scarf. Exquisite work, she murmured, but not necessarily a lady's choice. A man might select such a thing to mislead, don't you think, Inspector? Crane raised an eyebrow, unaccustomed to such musings from civilians, but made no reply. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the desk, noting a silver cigarette case, an ink blotter, and a half-finished letter in Sir Reginald's precise hand. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and lavender, an odd combination that lingered in her mind. Inspector Crane outlined the suspects: Colin Trent, Sir Reginald's aide, a young man with ambitions beyond his station, Lady Eleanor Harrow, the diplomat's poised but distant wife, Thomas Pike, the driver, whose loyalty was unquestioned but whose rough demeanour invited scrutiny, and Madame Yvonne Dubois, a Galorian envoy whose visit coincided with the tragedy. All were in the embassy last night, Crane said, and all had access to this floor. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the possibilities. Like a gardener inspecting soil for hidden roots. As they left the suite, Miss Marple paused at a window overlooking a small courtyard below, its cobblestones slick with mist. A gardener was raking leaves, his movements slow and deliberate. A secluded spot, she remarked to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over the click of her needles. Inspector Crane, impatient to resume his interviews, did not hear. But Miss Marple's thoughts were already weaving a pattern. Death, she knew, was rarely as simple as it seemed, and in the silent embassy, secrets were as thick as the fog outside. Chapter 2. The AIDS, Alabitha Valorian Embassy, even in the wake of tragedy, maintained an air of disciplined order. Its corridors hushed save for the occasional creak of polished floorboards or the distant clatter of a typewriter. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her backed chair in the embassy's oak-panelled library, observed the scene with her characteristic quiet attentiveness. Her knitting needles moved rhythmically, crafting a delicate lace pattern, while her eyes, sharp behind their spectacles, took in every detail of the room. The library was a grand space, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes on diplomacy and history, a crystal decanter of brandy gleaming on a sideboard. It was here, Colin Trent had claimed, that he spent the fatal hour between 8 and 9 the previous evening, when Sir Reginald Harrow met his end. Inspector Crane, his notebook open and his expression one of practiced neutrality, stood before Trent, who sat rigidly at a long table, his hands clasped tightly before him. Trent was a man in his early 30s, with a lean frame and a face that might have been handsome were it not for the nervous energy that seemed to coil beneath his skin. His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit immaculate, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers toyed with a fountain pen, spinning it in small, restless circles. A habit, she thought, or a sign of something more. Mr. Trent, Inspector Crane began, his voice clipped and authoritative. You stated you were here, in this library, organizing Sir Reginald's correspondence during the time of the murder. Is that correct? Trent nodded, his eyes meeting. The inspector's briefly before darting to the side. Yes, sir. I was sorting through his letters and cables. Sir Reginald was particular about his files. Everything had to be in order for his morning briefings. And you saw no one, heard. Nothing unusual. Crane pressed, his pencil poised. Nothing, Trent replied, his voice steady but a touch too quick. The library is quite isolated, as you can see. I was alone until I joined the staff for a late supper around 9:30. Miss Marple. Needles paused for the briefest moment as she glanced at the library's tall windows, their heavy drapes drawn back to reveal a view of the embassy's rear courtyard. The cobblestones below glistened under a thin drizzle, and a faint light from a ground-floor window cast shadows across the scene. She made a mental note of the courtyard's seclusion, accessible only through a narrow passage from the embassy's service entrance. A quiet place, she murmured to herself, but not invisible. Crane continued his questioning, his tone probing but not unkind. Sir Reginald was a demanding employer, I take it. Trent's lips tightened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she saw a flicker of resentment in his eyes. He was exacting, Trent admitted. He expected precision, loyalty, but I respected him. He was brilliant, in his way. Brilliant men often make enemies, Crane observed, scribbling a note. Did he have any? Here, in the embassy. Trent hesitated, his fingers stilling on the pen. Not enemies, exactly. Disagreements, perhaps. Diplomacy is a delicate business. Sir Reginald's policies, trade restrictions, border disputes, didn't always sit well with certain parties. Such as Madame Dubois? Crane asked, his eyes narrowing. Trent's expression remained carefully neutral. Madame Dubois and Sir Reginald had professional differences, yes. Gloria and Valoria have competing interests, but I wouldn't call it personal. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze soft but penetrating. And you, Mr. Trent, did you ever find Sir Reginald's demands overwhelming? Her voice was gentle, almost grandmotherly, but there was a steel beneath it. That made Trent shift in his seat. I managed, he said curtly. It was my job. Crane dismissed Trent for the moment, instructing him to remain available, and the young man rose, smoothing his tie with a quick, nervous gesture before exiting the library. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the slight stiffness in his gait, as if he carried an unseen burden. An ambitious young man, she remarked to Crane once the door closed. Ambition can be a dangerous thing, Inspector, when it outpaces loyalty. Crane raised an eyebrow, accustomed by now to her cryptic observations. You think he's hiding something? Oh, I shouldn't like to say just yet, Miss Marple replied, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. But young men like Mr. Trent often have secrets. In my village, there was a lad, Tommy Pierce, who worked as a clerk, always so eager to please, but he had a habit of listening at doors. It led to trouble, you know. Crane, unsure whether to take her anecdote seriously, turned his attention to the library itself. The room was orderly, its shelves meticulously arranged, but Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a small writing desk in the corner, where a stack of papers lay neatly aligned. She rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and approached the desk, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface. A faint smudge of ink caught her attention, and she peered closer, noting a discarded envelope with a torn flap. The postmark was Valorian, but the address was smudged, unreadable. Mr. Trent's work, I presume, she said, gesturing to the papers. He seems very thorough. Crane joined her, flipping through the stack. Routine correspondence, mostly. Trade agreements, diplomatic notes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the envelope, its torn edge suggesting haste or carelessness, neither of which suited Trent's fastidious demeanor. May I see the courtyard, Inspector? She asked suddenly, her tone as mild as if she were requesting a second cup of tea. Crane, though puzzled, obliged, leading her to a side door that opened onto the embassy's service passage. The air was damp and cool, the courtyard's cobblestones slick underfoot. A single lamp illuminated the space, casting long shadows from the surrounding walls. Miss Marple stepped forward, her sensible shoes making no sound, and peered at the ground. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, marred the stone near a drainpipe that climbed to the third floor, an odd place for a stroll. She remarked, her eyes tracing the pipe's path upward. It passed close to the windows of Sir Reginald's. Sweet, she noted, though the distance seemed too great for an easy climb. Still, the courtyard's isolation intrigued her. Does this passage see much traffic, Inspector? Crane shook his head. Only the staff use its servants, delivery men the driver. It's locked at night. And Mr. Trent, she asked, her voice deceptively casual. Might he have reason to come here? Crane frowned. He says he was. In the library. Why do you ask? Miss Marple smiled, her expression inscrutable. Oh, no reason, Inspector. Just an old woman's curiosity. But her mind was already turning, piecing together fragments of the scene. Trent's nervous hands, the torn envelope, the secluded courtyard. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a grocer's boy who swore he was in the shop when a theft occurred, only to be spotted later near the back alley. Alibis, she knew, were fragile things, easily undone by a single misstep. Back in the library, Crane summoned a junior embassy clerk, a mousy young woman named Miss Clara Bell, who had worked under Trent's supervision. Clara confirmed that Trent was often in the library late, sorting papers, but she hesitated when asked about the previous evening. He was here, I think, she said, her voice faltering. I saw him at his desk around 7, but I left for the staff quarters after that. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes kind but probing. And did you notice anything unusual, my dear? A sound, perhaps, or someone out of place? Clara blushed, twisting her hands. I don't know. It was a busy evening. Sir Reginald had a meeting scheduled, and there were visitors coming and going. I did see Mr. Trent step outside once, toward the back passage, but only for a moment. Crane's pencil paused. The back passage, to the courtyard. Clara nodded, her cheeks flaming. Yes, sir. He said he needed air. It was just before 8, I think. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind racing. Trent's alibi, so carefully constructed, now bore a crack. The courtyard, with its hidden corners and proximity to the suite, offered possibilities she could not yet dismiss. She thought of her nephew Raymond's friend, a young man who claimed to be at a lecture but was seen slipping into a bookshop. Instead, small eyes, she knew, often concealed larger truths. As Crane dismissed Clara, Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped neatly over her arm. I think I shall take a turn about the gardens, Inspector, she said, her tone as innocuous as ever. The air does wonders for clarity. Crane, though accustomed to her eccentricities, nodded absently, already reviewing his notes. Miss Marple stepped into the embassy's rear garden, a manicured expanse of roses and clipped hedges, and made her way toward the courtyard's entrance. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. She paused by the passage, her eyes scanning the ground for further clues. A cigarette stub, half buried in the gravel, caught her attention. It was a foreign brand, Valorian, with a gold filter tip expensive, and not the sort a servant might smoke. Tucking the stub into her handkerchief, she returned to the library, her mind alight with questions. Trent's alibi was shaky, his manner suspect, but motive remained elusive. Had he quarrelled with Sir Reginald? Was there a secret in those papers, something worth killing for? And what of the scarf, with its delicate embroidery? It was too early to say, but Miss Marple knew that secrets, like weeds, had a way of surfacing in the most unexpected places. As she settled back into her chair, Inspector Crane glanced at her, his expression a mix of curiosity and exasperation. You found something, haven't you, Miss Marple? Oh, nothing definite, Inspector, she replied, her smile serene. Just a thread or two to pull. In my village, you know, there was a young man who swore he was at home when a window was broken. But a neighbour saw him in the lane, and a shard of glass in his pocket told the rest of the story. Crane sighed, unsure whether to indulge her. "We'll speak to Lady Eleanor next," he said. Perhaps she shed light on her husband's affairs. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking once more. "Indeed," she said softly. "Light is what we need, Inspector, and perhaps a little patience." Her eyes, however, were fixed on the courtyard window, where the shadows seemed to hold secrets of their own. Chapter 3. The Grieving Widow, the Valorian Embassy's private parlour, reserved for the diplomatic family, was a study in restrained elegance. Its walls, adorned with pale blue silk and framed botanical prints, exuded a calm that belied the turmoil of the past 24 hours. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting a warm glow over the room's furnishings, a velvet-upholstered chaise, a rosewood table bearing a silver tea service, and a vase of white lilies that lent a faint, funereal scent to the air. Miss Jane Marple, seated on a cushioned chair with her knitting bag at her side, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. Her needles moved steadily, crafting a delicate shawl, but her eyes, bright and discerning, missed nothing. Lady Eleanor Harrow, the diplomat's widow, sat opposite her, poised on the edge of the chaise. She was a woman of striking beauty, with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, and a complexion pale as porcelain, though her green eyes were shadowed with fatigue. Her black morning dress, though simple, was impeccably tailored, and she clutched a lace handkerchief, its edges crumpled from nervous twisting. Inspector Crane stood near the fireplace, his notebook open, his demeanour one of professional detachment tempered by a trace of sympathy. "Lady Eleanor," Crane began, his voice measured, "we appreciate your willingness to speak with us so soon after your loss. Can you tell us about your movements last evening, between 8 and 9 o'clock? Lady Eleanor's gaze flickered to the fire, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "I was in my rooms," she said, her voice low but steady. "I dined alone, as Reginald had a late meeting. I retired early, around 8:30, and remained there until the news came." Her voice caught, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle concern. "Alone, my dear, the entire evening." Her tone was soft, almost maternal, but there was a precision to her words that made Lady Eleanor glance at her sharply. "Yes," Lady Eleanor replied, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I often dine alone when Reginald is occupied. It's not unusual." Crane nodded, jotting a note. "And you heard nothing? No voices, no footsteps in the corridor?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "My rooms are at the far end of the hall, from Reginald's suite. The walls are thick, and I was preoccupied with my thoughts." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she leaned forward slightly. "It must be difficult, Lady Eleanor, to be so often alone in such a grand place. I remember Mrs. Bantry, in my village, used to say how lonely a big house could feel, even with a husband nearby. Did you and Sir Reginald spend much time together?" Lady Eleanor's lips parted, as if to protest, but she hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "We were happy," she said at last, though the words carried a rehearsed quality. "Reginald was devoted to his work, and I respected that. We had our own routines." Crane seized on the pause. "But not always in harmony. Perhaps we've heard there were disagreements." Lady Eleanor's cheeks flushed, a faint rose against her pallor. "What marriage is without its tensions, Inspector? Reginald was under great pressure trade, negotiations, border disputes with Gloria. He could be secretive, even with me. But that was his nature, not a cause for discord. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. She noted the absence of personal touches in the parlour. No photographs of the couple, no small mementos of shared years. The room, like Lady Eleanor's demeanour, was beautiful but cold. Secretive, Miss Marple murmured, as if to herself. How trying that must have been. In St. Mary Mead there was a young wife, Mrs. Cleary, whose husband kept his business affairs quite hidden. It led to such misunderstandings, poor thing. Lady Eleanor's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing, her fingers twisting the handkerchief anew. Crane, sensing an opening, pressed further. Did Sir Reginald ever mention concerns about his staff? Mr. Trent, for instance, or anyone else? Colin Trent is competent, Lady Eleanor said quickly, almost too quickly. Reginald relied on him. As for others, he never spoke of trouble, but he was cautious, always. He trusted few people. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click filling the silence. She thought of the silk scarf, its peony embroidery so delicate, so feminine. That scarf, Inspector, she said suddenly, her voice mild. It was found in Sir Reginald's suite, was it not? Such a lovely piece. Do you have one like it? Lady Eleanor. The question hung in the air, and Lady Eleanor's hand stilled. I have many scarves, she said, her voice faltering. I don't recall one exactly like that. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. Only that it's such a distinctive item. One wonders how it came to be there. Her eyes, however, were fixed on Lady Eleanor's face, noting the sudden tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the handkerchief like a lifeline. Crane, catching Miss Marple's drift, produced a photograph of the scarf from his folder. This is the item in question. Does it look familiar? Lady Eleanor studied the photograph, her expression unreadable. It's possible I own something similar, she admitted, but I'd need to check my wardrobe. I haven't worn a scarf like that in some time. Crane made a note, his face impassive. We'll need to examine your belongings, Lady Eleanor, with your permission. It may help us rule out certain possibilities. Of course, she said, though her voice was tight. Anything to help. As Crane continued his questions, Miss Marple's attention wandered to the parlour's details. A small writing desk stood in the corner, its surface bare save for a single letter opener and a crystal inkwell. She rose, her movements slow and unthreatening, and approached the desk, her fingers brushing the polished wood. A faint scent of lavender lingered, the same she had noticed in Sir Reginald's suite. Do you write many letters, Lady Eleanor? She asked, her tone conversational. Not as many as I should, Lady Eleanor replied, a touch of weariness in her voice. Reginald handled most of our correspondence. I prefer to keep things simple. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the desk's drawer, which was slightly ajar. A glimpse of paper caught her attention, but she made no move to investigate further, not yet. Instead, she returned to her chair, her mind turning over the widow's words. The absence of warmth in Lady Eleanor's account of her marriage was striking, as was her quick defence of Colin Trent in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple had known a widow, Mrs. Price, whose grief masked a deeper resentment toward her late husband. Such resentments, she knew, could simmer beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. Crane concluded his questions, thanking Lady Eleanor for her time. As she rose to leave, Miss Marple spoke again, her voice gentle but deliberate. One last thing. My dear, did you ever sense that Sir Reginald was troubled? perhaps by something he couldn't share. Lady Eleanor paused at the door, her hand on the knob. He was always troubled by his work, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but he never burdened me with the details. With that, she slipped out, leaving a faint trace of lavender in her wake. Crane turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "She's holding something back," he said bluntly. "That business about the scarf, she knows more than she's letting on." "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking softly. "Or perhaps she's protecting someone or something. Grief, Inspector, can make one cautious. But so can guilt." Crane grunted, unconvinced but unwilling to dismiss her insight. "I'll have her rooms searched. If that scarf is hers, it could change everything." Miss Marple nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She recalled the torn envelope in the library, the cigarette stub in the courtyard, and now the lavender scent that linked the parlour to the crime scene. Lady Eleanor's solitude, her guarded responses, suggested a woman accustomed to keeping secrets, whether her own or her husband's. "We must be patient, Inspector," she said, her voice serene. "In my village there was a lady who seemed a picture of devotion, but her garden hid a secret or two. People, you see, are much like gardens, beautiful on the surface, but with roots that run deep." Crane, though accustomed to her parables, merely nodded, his mind already on the next interview. Miss Marple, however, sat back, her knitting a steady rhythm as she pieced together the fragments of the embassy's secrets, each one a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. Chapter 4. The Driver's Tale, the Valorian Embassy's Garage. Tucked behind the main building was a stark contrast to the grandeur of its polished interiors. Its concrete floor was streaked with oil, and the air carried the sharp tempth of petrol and metal polish. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh light over the embassy's sleek black car, its chrome gleaming like a mirror. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stood just inside the doorway, her knitting bag clutched in one hand. Her sensible shoes made no sound on the cold floor, and her eyes, bright and inquisitive, took in every detail of the scene. Inspector Crane, beside her, adjusted his notebook, his expression one of brisk determination as he prepared to question Thomas Pike, Sir Reginald Harrow's driver. Pike was a burly man, his broad shoulders straining against a worn jacket, his hands calloused from years of manual work. His face, weathered and ruddy, bore the marks of a life spent outdoors, and his greying hair was cropped close, giving him a faintly military air. He stood by the car, a rag in one hand, polishing the hood with slow, deliberate strokes. When Crane called his name, he straightened, his movements heavy but controlled, and met the inspector's gaze with a guarded nod. "Mr. Pike," Crane began, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, "you've told us you were here in the garage between 8 and 9 last evening when Sir Reginald was killed. Can you confirm that?" Pike's jaw tightened, and he gave a curt nod. "Aye, sir. I was here, cleaning the car. Sir Reginald liked it, spotless, even if he wasn't going out. It's my job to keep it ready, alone." Crane asked, his pencil poised. "Alone," Pike replied, his voice gruff. "The other staff don't come down here much. Too cold, they say." A faint smirk tugged at his lips, but it vanished quickly under Crane's scrutiny. Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting needles idle for the moment as she studied Pike. His hands, she noted, were steady, but there was a rigidity in his posture, as if he were bracing himself against more than just the inspector's questions. A loyal man, she thought, but loyalty can be a heavy burden. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but precise. It must be quite a responsibility, Mr. Pike, looking after Sir Reginald's car. Did you see him often in the course of your duties? Pike's eyes flicked to her, a flicker of surprise in their depths. Every day, ma'am. I drove him to meetings, to dinners. He trusted me to get him where he needed to be. And last evening, she asked, her tone as mild as a summer breeze, did you drive him anywhere, or was he in the embassy all day? Pike hesitated, his rag twisting in his hands. He was here all day. Had a meeting with that Galorian lady, Madame Dubois, in the afternoon. I was in the garage after that, didn't see him again. Crane seized on the pause. You didn't hear anything unusual? No voices, no commotion from the main building? Pike shook his head, his expression resolute. Nothing, sir. This place is solid thick walls. You don't hear much from the house unless you're right by the door. He gestured to the service passage, a narrow corridor connecting the garage to the embassy's rear entrance. Miss Marple gaze followed his gesture, noting the passage's dim lighting and its proximity to the courtyard she had observed earlier. The door was heavy, reinforced with iron, but it stood slightly ajar, as if recently used. A convenient route, she murmured, almost to herself. Does this passage see much use, Mr. Pike? Only for deliveries and such, he said, his voice gruff. Staff come through sometimes, but not at night. It's locked after hours. And last night, Crane pressed. Was it locked? Pike's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she saw a flash of unease. Far as I know, sir. I didn't check it myself. I was here, working. Crane made a note, his face impassive. We'll verify that with the staff. Now, about the scarf the one found around Sir Reginald's neck. Ever seen anything like it? Pike's hands stilled on the rag, and his jaw tightened further. Not my place to notice ladies' things, he said, his tone clipped. Sir, Reginald didn't wear scarves, and I don't keep track of what the others have. Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking, and she smiled faintly. Of course, Mr. Pike, but a man like you, always about the embassy, must see things others miss. In my village, there was a gardener, Mr. Hobbs, who knew every coming and going, simply because he was always there, watching quietly. Did you ever notice anything out of place with Sir Reginald? A worry, perhaps? Pike's eyes met hers, and for a moment she sensed a struggle behind his stoic facade. He was a good man, he said at last, his voice low. Worked hard. For Valoria, but he was careful, didn't trust easy. Lately, he seemed on edge, checking the car himself before we'd go anywhere, like he thought someone was watching. Crane's pencil paused. Watching? Did he say who? Pike shook his head. No names. Just said to keep my eyes open. I figured it was the usual diplomats. Politics, you know. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over his words. The driver's loyalty was evident, but his unease suggested more than he was willing to share. She thought of the cigarette stub she had found in the courtyard, its gold filter tip so out of place among the gravel. Do you smoke, Mr. Pike? She asked, her voice as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. No, ma'am, he said quickly. Gave it up years ago. Bad for the lungs. She smiled, tucking the information away. Very wise, she said. Habits can be so revealing, don't you think? Crane, sensing the interview was nearing its end, flipped his notebook shut. We'll need to check the garage log, Mr. Pike, to confirm your presence here last night, and we may have more questions later. Pike nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll be here, sir. Got nowhere else to go. As Crane turned to leave, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the garage. A workbench in the corner held an array of tools, neatly arranged, but her attention was drawn to a small pile of rags near the car. One, half hidden, bore a faint stained arc, almost like ink. She made no move to touch it, but her mind noted its presence, alongside the open service door and Pike's guarded manner. In St. Mary Mead, there had been a handyman, Mr. Stokes, who swore he was in his shed when a theft occurred, but a muddy boot print told a different story. Small details, she knew, could unravel even the stoutest alibi. Outside, the drizzle had returned, misting the air as Miss Marple and Crane stepped into the courtyard. She paused by the drain pipe she had noticed before, her eyes tracing its path to the third-floor windows. A long climb, she remarked, but not impossible for a determined man. Crane followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. You think? Pike could have gone up there. His log checks out he signed in at 7 and didn't leave until 10. Logs can be altered, Miss Marple said mildly, or overlooked. In my village, a shopkeeper once swore his ledger was perfect, but a smudge of jam on a page showed he'd been elsewhere. People forget the little things, Inspector. Crane grunted, unconvinced but noting her point. Pike's loyal, I'll give him that. But that business about Sir Reginald being on edge could be something there. We'll dig into it. Miss Marple nodded, her shawl drawn tighter against the damp. Loyalty is a fine thing, Inspector, but it can blind as well as bind. Mr. Pike sees much, I think, but says little. We must watch him closely. As they returned to the embassy, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tangle of threads. Pike's unease, the stained rag, the open passage door. Each was a clue, small but significant, in the puzzle of Sir Reginald's death. The scarf, with its delicate embroidery, loomed large in her mind, its presence a question mark that linked the suspects in ways yet unseen. She thought of Lady Eleanor's guarded responses, Colin Trent's nervous hands, and now Pike's reticence. The embassy, for all its silence, was alive with secrets, and Miss Marple knew that patience and a keen eye would unravel them in time. Chapter 5. The enigmatic envoy, the drawing room of the Valorian embassy, was a vision of diplomatic refinement, its walls adorned with gilded mirrors and tapestries depicting pastoral scenes from Valoria's rolling hills. A grand chandelier hung overhead, its crystals scattering light across the room, where a walnut table held a decanter of sherry and delicate crystal glasses. Miss Jane Marple sat near a window overlooking the embassy's front lawn, her knitting needles crafting a soft hum as they wove a pattern of pale blue wool. The drizzle outside had thickened into a steady rain, drumming softly against the panes, but the room's warmth kept the chill at bay. Inspector Crane stood by the table, his posture alert, as he prepared to question Madame Yvonne Dubois, the Galorian envoy whose presence in the embassy coincided so neatly with Sir Reginald Harrow's murder. Madame Dubois entered with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, her tall figure draped in a tailored grey suit, a silk scarf embroidered with violets pinned artfully to her shoulder. Her dark hair was swept into a chignon, and her eyes, a piercing hazel, surveyed the room with cool detachment. She was a woman in her late 40s, her beauty tempered by an air of calculated poise that suggested both confidence and caution. As she took her seat, she inclined her head to Miss Marple, a faint smile playing on her lips as if acknowledging an equal in a game yet to be defined. Madame Dubois, Crane began, his tone formal but edged with scrutiny. You were in this room last evening, between 8 and 8:30, discussing trade matters with Mr. Langley, the Undersecretary. Is that correct? Precisely, Inspector, Madame Dubois replied, her voice smooth and accented with the melodic cadence of Galloria. We were reviewing tariff proposals. Mr. Langley is a most diligent colleague, though our discussion was, shall we say, spirited. Her smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes, and after 8:30, Crane pressed, his pencil poised. Over his notebook, I returned to my guest quarters on the second floor, she said, her hands resting calmly in her lap. I had correspondence to attend to. I remained there until I heard of Sir Reginald's misfortune. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her expression one of gentle curiosity. Correspondence, Madame Dubois, at such a late hour. In my village, we seldom write letters after dinner, but I suppose diplomatic life demands such diligence. Madame Dubois's smile tightened, though her composure held. Diplomacy knows no hours, Miss Marple. Galloria expects timely reports, and I am nothing if not thorough. Crane nodded, though his eyes remained sharp. Your quarters are near Sir Reginald's suite, are they not? Did you hear anything unusual? Footsteps, voices, perhaps a struggle? Nothing, she said firmly. The embassy is well built, Inspector. One hears little through its walls. I was absorbed in my work and noticed no disturbances. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the scarf pinned to Madame Dubois's suit. Its embroidery, though different in pattern, bore a striking similarity to the peony-adorned silk found around Sir Reginald's neck. What a lovely scarf, she remarked, her voice as mild as a summer breeze. Such fine work. Do you have many like it? Madame Dubois's fingers brushed the scarf, a fleeting gesture. A few, she said, her tone light. They are a tradition in Galloria gifts, often for special occasions. This one was given to me by a colleague. Crane seized on the remark, producing the photograph of the murder weapon. This scarf was found at the scene. Does it resemble any of yours? Madame Dubois studied the image, her expression unreadable. It is similar in style, she admitted, but I cannot say it is mine. Many such scarves are made in my country. They are not uncommon. Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking, but her mind was alert. The envoy's poise was impeccable, yet there was a precision to her answers that suggested rehearsal. She thought of Mrs. Langley in St. Mary Mead, a woman whose polished manners hid a knack for eavesdropping. You and Sir Reginald had differences, I understand, Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. Trade disputes, perhaps. Such things constrain even the most cordial relations. Madame Dubois's eyes met hers, and for a moment a spark of amusement flickered in their depths. Sir Reginald was a formidable negotiator, she said. Valloria's interests often clashed with Galloria's, particularly on tariffs and border agreements. But such as diplomacy disagreement is not enmity. Yet enmity can arise, Crane interjected, his voice firm. We've heard, sir. Reginald was cautious, perhaps distrustful. Did he ever express concerns about Galloria or about you? Madame Dubois's smile faded, replaced by a cool reserve. He was guarded, yes, but that was his nature. He never accused me directly, if that's what you mean. Our discussions were professional, always. Miss Marple nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. The drawing-room's table held a tray of papers, neatly stacked, and she noted a faint smudge of ink on one corner, similar to the mark she had seen in the library. She rose, her movements slow and unassuming, and approached the table under the pretense of adjusting her shawl. Her fingers brushed the papers, and she glimpsed a letterhead bearing the Galorian crest. "Do you often work here, Madame Dubois?" she asked, her voice as innocent as a child's. "When necessary," the envoy replied, her eyes following Miss Marple's movements. "The drawing room is quiet, conducive to thought." Crane, sensing the interview was nearing its end, made a final note. "We'll need to confirm your movements with Mr. Langley, Madame Dubois, and we may need to examine your quarters, with your permission." "Of course," she said, rising with a fluid grace. "I have nothing to hide, Inspector." But as she moved to the door, Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance she cast toward the table, as if ensuring nothing was amiss. As the door closed behind her, Crane turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "She's smooth, I'll give her that. But that scarfed too close to the murder weapon for comfort." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking softly. "But smoothness, Inspector, can be a mask. In my village, there was a lady, Miss Harroway, who spoke so charmingly that no one noticed her habit of borrowing things that weren't hers. People reveal themselves in the smallest ways." Crane grunted, flipping through his notebook. "Her alibi holds for now Langley's a reliable witness, but I don't trust her. She's too composed, too careful." Miss Marple smiled, faintly, her eyes drifting to the window. The rain had eased, leaving the lawn a patchwork of glistening green. She thought of the courtyard, the cigarette stub, the stained rag in the garage, and now the Galorian letterhead. Madame Dubois's scarf, so like the murder weapon, was a thread that tied her to the crime, yet her calm demeanor suggested a woman who knew how to cover her tracks. "We must look to the edges, Inspector," she said softly. "The center of a puzzle is often clear, but the edges, those are where the pieces fit together." Crane, though puzzled by her metaphor, nodded. "We'll move on to the staff next. Someone must have seen something, a servant, a clerk. This place is too busy for a murder to go unnoticed." Miss Marple agreed, though her mind lingered on Madame Dubois, the envoy's poise, her careful answers, and that violet scarf formed a pattern, subtle but distinct. As she gathered her knitting, she thought of the secrets that swirled through the embassy, each suspect a thread in a tapestry of deception. Patience, she knew, would reveal the design, and Miss Marple was nothing if not patient. Chapter 6. A pattern emerges. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Lady Beatrice Compton's townhouse, casting soft shadows across the drawing room's chintz-covered furniture. The rain had ceased, leaving the air fresh, and the streets of Belgravia glistening under a tentative sun. Miss Jane Marple sat by a small table, a steaming cup of Earl Grey before her, her knitting needles crafting a delicate pattern of pale blue wool. Lady Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, bustled about, ensuring the tea tray was laden with scones and clotted cream. But her chatter was subdued, her eyes alight with curiosity about the embassy's grim affair. "Jane, you must tell me," Lady Beatrice said, settling into an armchair with a rustle of silk. "What do you make of it all? A diplomat strangled in his own suite. It's like something from one of your nephew's novels." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm. "It is rather dramatic, Beatrice," she replied, her voice mild. "But life, you know, has a way of outdoing fiction. There's a pattern forming, though it's not yet clear, like a piece of lace One must see the threads before the design emerges. Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Threads, oh, do tell. Is it that nervous young aide, or the widow with her heirs, or that Galorian woman who looks like she could charm a snake? Miss Marple's smile widened, but she offered no immediate answer, her mind sifting through the morning's observations. The silk scarf, with its peony embroidery, remained the central enigma, its delicate beauty a stark contrast to its violent use. Colin Trent's fidgeting hands and shaky alibi, Lady Eleanor's guarded grief, Thomas Pike's reticent loyalty, and Madame Dubois's polished composure, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be fully woven. Each suspect had opportunity, yet motive remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of the embassy's opulent halls. She sipped her tea, her thoughts returning to the courtyard, where the cigarette stub with its gold filter tip had caught her attention. Then there was the stained rag in the garage, the smudged envelope in the library, and the faint scent of lavender linking Lady Eleanor's parlour to Sir Reginald's suite. Most recently, Madame Dubois's violet-embroidered scarf had added another layer, its similarity to the murder weapon too striking to ignore. A pattern, she murmured, but not yet complete. Lady Beatrice, impatient for details, pressed on. Come now, Jane, you've seen them all. Surely you have a suspicion. Miss Marple set her cup down, her eyes twinkling. Suspicions, Beatrice, are like weeds in a garden, best not to pluck them too soon, lest you miss the roots. But I will say this, the scarf is the key. Its presence suggests intent, not impulse. Someone chose it deliberately, perhaps to mislead, perhaps to accuse. Eager to pursue her inquiries, Miss Marple requested Lady Beatrice's assistance in arranging a discreet visit to the embassy staff quarters. Beatrice, delighted by the prospect of aiding her friend's sleuthing, made a swift telephone call, and within the hour, Miss Marple was back at the embassy, escorted by a young footman to the servants' wing. The quarters were a maze of narrow corridors, their plain walls a stark contrast to the grandeur upstairs. Yet even here, the embassy's orderliness prevailed, with every door neatly labelled and every surface spotless. Miss Marple was shown to Colin Trent's room, a small but tidy space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a desk cluttered with papers. The footman, a nervous lad named Peter, hovered nearby, clearly uneasy about allowing a stranger into the aide's private domain. Mr. Trent's particular about his things, Peter said, wringing his hands. He doesn't like anyone touching his desk. Quite understandable, Miss Marple replied, her tone soothing. I shan't disturb a thing, my dear. Just a glance, to get a sense of the man. Her eyes, however, were sharp as she surveyed the room. The desk held a stack of diplomatic cables, a fountain pen, and a locked drawer that piqued her interest. Does Mr. Trent often work here? She asked, her fingers brushing the desk's edge. Peter nodded. All hours, ma'am. He's always writing or sorting papers. Says it's for Sir Reginald. But, he trailed off, blushing. But, Miss Marple prompted, her voice gentle. Peter hesitated, then lowered his voice. He's been jumpy lately. Snaps at us for no reason. And I saw him once, late at night, burning papers in the courtyard. Thought it was odd. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for movement. Burning papers. How curious. When was this, Peter? A week ago, maybe, he said, glancing at the door. I didn't think much of it then, but now. She nodded, tucking the information away. You've been most helpful, my dear. Now, might I see the courtyard again? I do enjoy a breath of fresh air." Peter, relieved to leave the room, led her to the service passage and out into the courtyard. The cobblestones were still damp from the morning's rain, and the air carried a faint scent of wet earth. Miss Marple paused by the drainpipe, her eyes tracing its path to the third-floor windows. The scuff mark she had noticed earlier was still visible, and she bent closer, noting a faint smear of mud on the pipe's base. "Someone's been careless," she murmured, her mind conjuring an image of a hurried figure in the dark dot. As Peter waited, she wandered to the spot where she had found the cigarette stub. The gravel was undisturbed, but her memory of the stub's gold filter tip lingered. It was a Valorian brand, expensive and rare, not the sort a footman or driver might. "Smoke? Does Mr. Trent smoke, Peter?" she asked, her tone casual. "Not that I've seen," Peter replied. "He's always on about clean air and such. Says it's bad for his work." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. The courtyard, with its secluded corners and access to the embassy's upper floors, was a place of possibilities. Trent's burning of papers, his locked drawer, and his presence here contradicting his library alibi suggested a man with secrets. Yet the scarf, with its feminine elegance, pointed elsewhere, perhaps to Lady Eleanor or Madame Dubois, and Pike's unease in the garage, coupled with the stained rag, hinted at another thread in the pattern. Back at Lady Beatrice's, Miss Marple settled into her chair, her knitting resumed as she pondered. The embassy was a microcosm of human nature, its polished surface hiding currents of ambition, fear, and betrayal. Trent's nervous energy, Lady Eleanor's guarded solitude, Pike's reticent loyalty, and Madame Dubois's calculated charm each played a role, but the motive for Sir Reginald's death remained elusive. The scarf, she knew, was no accident. Its choice was deliberate, a message or a misdirection. "Beatrice," she said at last, her voice soft, "do you recall that affair in St. Mary Mead with the vicar's wife and the missing brooch? Everyone thought it was stolen, but it was hidden in plain sight, meant to cast blame. I wonder if our scarf is much the same." Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. "You think someone planted it? Oh, Jane, how thrilling. But who?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "That, my dear, is what we must discover. The pattern is there, but we need a few more threads to see it clearly." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a golden glow, Miss Marple's mind wove the fragments together. The courtyard's secrets, the locked drawer, the lavender scent, and the scarf's silent accusation. The embassy's silence was deceptive, she knew, and with patience the truth would emerge, as delicate and inevitable as the lace in her hands. Chapter 7. The Hidden Correspondence, the Valorian Embassy. For all its grandeur, seemed to shrink under the weight of its secrets as Miss Jane Marple returned the following morning. The fog had lifted, replaced by a crisp autumn sun that bathed the building's Georgian facade in a golden light, but within its walls the air remained heavy with unspoken truths. Miss Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, moved through the marble-floored corridors with the quiet purpose of a woman who knew her task. Inspector Crane had granted her access to Sir Reginald Harrow's private suite once more, this time to examine his desk treasure trove of papers that might hold the key to his murder. The suite was, as she remembered it, opulent, with its velvet drapes and mahogany furnishings, though the absence of Sir Reginald's presence lent it a hollow chill. The desk, positioned beneath a tall window overlooking the embassy's front lawn, was a clutter of diplomatic life ink blotters, a silver cigarette case, a half-finished letter in Sir Reginald's precise hand. The silk scarf, that delicate instrument of death, was no longer present, secured in police custody. But its peony embroidery lingered in Miss Marple's mind, a thread tying the suspects together. Inspector Crane, his notebook tucked under his arm, stood by the desk, his expression one of restrained impatience. "We've been through most of these papers," he said, gesturing to the neatly stacked files. "Routine diplomatic correspondence, trade agreements, memos, nothing out of the ordinary." "But you insisted on seeing them yourself, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Oh, Inspector, it's often the ordinary things that tell the most extraordinary tales. In my village there was a shopkeeper, Mr. Tuttle, whose ledger seemed perfectly dullen, till one noticed the dates didn't quite match. Small things, you see, can reveal so much." She settled into a chair, her knitting needles emerging from her bag, their soft clicking a counterpoint. To the room's silence. She began with the topmost papers, her fingers deft but careful, as if handling a fragile tapestry. Most were, as Crane described, official cables, typed reports on Valorian trade policy, and notes on border disputes with Galoria. Yet her attention was drawn to a single sheet, tucked beneath a pile of routine memos. It was handwritten, its ink fresh, and its contents obscured by a simple substitution cipher code that, to Miss Marple's practiced eye, was almost childishly straightforward. She tilted her head, her lips pursing as she deciphered it silently. "Letter by letter. Inspector," she said at last, her voice soft but firm, "this is most interesting. A letter, coded, but not so cleverly as its writer might think." She handed it to Crane, who frowned at the jumble of letters. "A code," he said, his brow furrowing. "What does it say?" Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her needles pausing. "It's a warning, Inspector, about Valorian secrets being leaked to Galoria. The recipient is unnamed, but the tone suggests familiarity, a colleague, perhaps, or someone closer." Crane's eyes narrowed, and he took the letter, studying it as if it might yield its secrets under scrutiny. "Leaks to Galoria. That points to Madame Dubois, doesn't it? Or perhaps Trenty had access to all of Sir Reginald's papers." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. "But a coded letter suggests caution, even fear. Sir Reginald was a careful man, was he not? In St. Mary Mead, there was a vicar who kept his sermons in Codnot for secrecy, but because he feared they'd be misunderstood. People hide things for many reasons, Inspector." Crane grunted, unconvinced but intrigued. He rifled through the desk's drawers, finding only pens, a seal, and a small key that did not fit the desk's lock. Miss Marple, however, lingered on the letter, her mind turning over its implications. Espionage was a dangerous game, one that could drive a man or a woman to desperate acts. The letter's fresh ink suggested it was recent, perhaps written on the night of the murder. Had Sir Reginald confronted someone about the leak? And if so, who? Her gaze drifted to the cigarette case, its silver surface gleaming in the sunlight. She opened it, noting a single cigarette inside a Valorian brand, with a gold filter tip identical to the stub she had found in the courtyard. "Curious," she murmured, holding it up. "Mr. Pike said he didn't smoke, and Mr. Trent claims he avoids it, yet here we are." Crane took the cigarette, examining it. Sir Reginald's, perhaps, or a visitor's. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "Or a clue, Inspector. In my village, a young man once left a cigarette end in a garden, thinking it would go unnoticed. It led straight to him, you know. Small habits betray us. She turned her attention to the desk's surface, noting a faint scratch near the edge, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. Bending closer, she spotted a tiny speck of wax, red and glossy, embedded in the wood. Sealing wax, she said softly. For a letter, perhaps, or something more private. Crane followed. Her gaze, his interest piqued. We didn't find any sealed letters, but if he was hiding something. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The coded letter, the cigarette, the wax all pointed to a man guarding secrets, perhaps at the cost of his life. She thought of Colin Trent's locked drawer, Lady Eleanor's lavender scent, Thomas Pike's unease, and Madame Dubois's violet scarf. Each suspect was a piece of the puzzle, but the letter suggested a deeper motive, one tied to the shadowy world of espionage. "Inspector," she said, rising with her knitting bag in hand, "might we speak to the staff again? The maids, perhaps, or the footman, Peter. They see things, you know, that others miss." Crane agreed, and they summoned Peter, the nervous footman who had escorted Miss Marple to Trent's room. He stood before them, twisting his cap in his hands, his eyes darting to the desk as if it held some unspoken threat. "Did Sir Reginald often work late at this desk?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle. "Yes, ma'am," Peter replied. "He'd be here till all hours, writing or reading. Sometimes he'd lock the door, even when he was alone. And did anyone else use this desk?" She pressed, her eyes kind but probing. Peter hesitated, his cheeks flushing. "Mr. Trent, sometimes. He'd come in to fetch papers or leave notes. But Sir Reginald didn't like it said Trent was too nosy." Crane's pencil paused, nosy. "Did Sir Reginald ever mention anything specific, documents missing, perhaps?" Peter shook his head. "Not to me, sir, but he was particular about his things. Kept that cigarette case close, like it was special." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind weaving the threads together. Trent's access to the desk, his late-night paper burning in the courtyard. And now the coded letter pointed to a man entangled in more than mere clerical duties. Yet the scarf, with its feminine elegance, suggested another handlady, Eleanor, perhaps, or Madame Dubois, and Pike's reticence in the garage could not be ignored. As Peter was dismissed, Miss Marple paused by the window, her gaze falling on the lawn below, where a gardener was trimming hedges with meticulous care. "A careful man, Sir Reginald," she murmured. "But even careful men make enemies when secrets are at stake." Crane closed his notebook, his expression grim. "Espionage, Miss Marple. That's what this letter suggests. If Sir Reginald was onto a leak, it gives us a motive, but for whom?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting needles still. "That, Inspector, is what we must uncover. The pattern is clearer now, but the final thread eludes us. In St. Mary Mead, a coded note once led to a stolen recipe, of all things. But here, I fear, the stakes are far higher." As they left the suite, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tapestry of clues. The letter's warning, the cigarette's gold. Tip, the wax's silent testimony. The embassy's secrets were beginning to unravel, and she knew that with patience the truth would emerge, as delicate and inevitable as the lace in her hands. Chapter 8. A confrontation. The library of the Valorian embassy was a haven of quiet authority. Its towering shelves, laden with volumes of diplomatic history and law, their leather spines gleaming in the soft light of brass lamps. A long oak table dominated the center, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the flickering glow of a fire in the hearth. Miss Jane Marple sat at one end, her knitting needles moving with their usual rhythmic precision, crafting a delicate shawl that seemed to grow with each passing hour. Her presence, unassuming yet oddly commanding, drew the eyes of the four suspects gathered at Inspector Crane's request: Colin Trent, Lady Eleanor Harrow, Thomas Pike, and Madame Yvonne Dubois. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls held their breath, awaiting the unraveling of the embassy's secrets. Inspector Crane stood at the head of the table, his notebook open, his sharp gaze moving from one face to another. "Thank you for joining us," he began, his voice steady but laced with an edge of authority. "We've made progress in our investigation into Sir Reginald Harrow's death, and it's time to clarify certain matters. Miss Marple has been assisting, and her observations have been most helpful." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, but she said nothing, her needles clicking softly as she watched the suspects. Colin Trent sat rigidly, his hands clasped tightly, the fountain pen he so often fidgeted with absent from his. Grasp. Lady Eleanor, pale and composed in her mourning black, clutched her lace handkerchief, her green eyes darting to the door as if expecting rescue. Thomas Pike, his burly frame awkward in the delicate chair, stared at the table, his jaw set in a stubborn line. Madame Dubois, poised as ever, leaned back slightly, her violet-embroidered scarf a vivid contrast to her grey suit, her hazel eyes meeting Crane's with a cool, almost defiant calm. "Let's begin with the scarf," Crane said, producing a photograph of the murder weapon and placing it on the table. The peony embroidery seemed to glow in the firelight, its delicate beauty a stark reminder of its grim purpose. "This was found around Sir Reginald's neck. It's a distinctive piece, Galorian in style." "Madame Dubois, you admitted to owning similar scarves." "Lady Eleanor, you were uncertain but suggested you might have one like it. Can either of you clarify?" Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened on her handkerchief, her voice low but firm. "I've checked my wardrobe, Inspector. I have no scarf like that. It's not mine." Madame Dubois raised an eyebrow, her smile faint. "As I said, such scarves are common in Galoria. I have several, but I cannot say this one is mine without seeing it closely." "Have you tested it for fingerprints?" Crane's lips twitched, as if amused by her composure. "We have, Madame. The results are inconclusive, smudged, likely from handling. But its presence suggests intent, not accident." His gaze shifted. "To Trent, Mr. Trent, you had access to Sir Reginald's suite. Did you ever see this scarf there?" Trent's face paled, and he shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I handled papers, not personal items." Sir Reginald kept his suite private. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she leaned forward, her voice gentle but piercing. "Yet you were seen elsewhere, Mr. Trent, were you not? Near the courtyard, just before 8 o'clock, despite claiming to be here in the library. In my village, there was a young man, Tom Carter, who swore he was at home when a theft occurred. But a neighbour's word placed him elsewhere, small. Discrepancies, you see, can change everything." Trent's hands twitched, and a bead of sweat glistened on his brow. I stepped out for air," he stammered. "It was only a moment. I was back in the library by 8. Pike shifted in his seat, his gruff voice breaking the silence. "Air, was it? Funny place to get it, that courtyard, not exactly a garden stroll. His tone carried a hint of scorn, and Miss Marple noted the tension between the two men, like a taut wire ready to snap. Crane seized the moment, producing the coded letter Miss Marple had found. "This was on Sir Reginald's desk," he said, holding it up. "A warning about Valorian secrets leaked to Gloria. Mr. Trent, as his aide, you handled his correspondence. Did you know of this?" Trent's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "No, Inspector. I sorted his papers, but I never saw that Sir Reginald was private about certain matters." Lady Eleanor's gaze snapped to the letter, her lips parting in a silent gasp. "Secrets," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Reginald never told me, but he was so guarded lately. I thought it was just his work." Madame Dubois remained impassive, though her fingers brushed her scarf, a fleeting gesture. "Leaks are common in diplomacy," she said coolly. "Sir Reginald was cautious, as he should have been, but this letter proves nothing." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind weaving the threads together. The letter, the scarf. The courtyard sighting-age pointed to a web of deception, but the motive remained just out of reach. She spoke again, her voice soft but deliberate. "Inspector, might we ask Mr. Trent about his desk? There's a locked drawer, I believe, in his room. In St. Mary Mead, a young clerk once kept a locked box, thinking it safe. But secrets, you know, have a way of coming out." Trent's composure cracked, his hands gripping the table's edge. "My drawer, that's private. You've no right." Crane raised a hand, his voice firm. "We have every right, Mr. Trent, with a murder. To open it, or we'll do it for you." The room fell silent, the fire's crackle the only sound as Trent rose, his movements jerky. He led them to his room in the staff quarters, the others trailing behind, their faces a study in unease. The small space was as tidy as before, but the locked drawer and the desk drew all eyes. Trent hesitated, his hand trembling as he produced a key from his pocket. With a reluctant twist, he opened it, revealing a small stack of documents, their edges marked with the Valorian seal. Crane pounced, lifting the topmost paper. It was a diplomatic memo, stamped confidential, detailing Valorian trade concessions documents, meant for Sir Reginald's eyes only. Beneath it was a letter, written in Trent's hand, addressed to an unnamed recipient in Gloria. "This is correspondence about trade terms," Crane said, his voice hardening. "But it's marked for Gloria. Explain yourself, Mr. Trent." Trent's face drained of color, his voice barely a whisper. It's not what it looks like. I was drafting notes for Sir Reginald. He asked me to betray Valoria," Crane snapped, his patience gone. "These are sensitive documents, and you've no business sending them anywhere." Lady Eleanor gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Pike's fists clenched, his eyes blazing with anger. "Disloyal," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "Sir Reginald trusted you." Madame Dubois alone remained calm, her expression unreadable. "Careful, Inspector," she said. "Drafting notes is not proof of treason. Mr. Trent may simply be overzealous." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes moving from face to face. Trent's panic, Lady Eleanor's shock, Pike's fury, and Madame Dubois's detachment formed a pattern, but it was incomplete. The documents were damning, but the scarf and its true owner remained a mystery. A confrontation reveals much, she thought, but not all. Crane folded the papers, his gaze fixed on Trent. "You'll remain under watch," Mr. Trent. We're not done with you. He turned to the others. This meeting is over, but no one leaves the embassy until we've searched every room. As the suspects dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her knitting bag in her lap. A step closer, Inspector, she said softly. But the scarf, you see, is still the key. In my village, a stolen ribbon once pointed to the wrong thief, because someone wished it so. We must be careful not to be misled. Crane nodded, though his mind was on the documents. Espionage is a motive, Miss Marple. Trent's in deep, but I'm not ruling out the others. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. Nor should you, Inspector. The pattern is clearer, but the final thread is yet to come. As she left the library, her thoughts turned to the courtyard, the lavender scent and the violet scarf, each a clue in a tapestry of betrayal that was slowly, inexorably coming into view. Chapter 9. The motive unravelled. The Valorian Embassy's library, with its towering shelves and flickering firelight, seemed to close in around Miss Jane Marple as she sat once more at the long oak table, her knitting needles crafting a delicate pattern of pale blue wool. The air was heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation, the suspects' faces, Colin Trent's panic, Lady Eleanor's shock, Thomas Pike's fury, and Madame Yvonne Dubois's cool detachment lingering in her mind like figures in a half-finished painting. Inspector Crane stood by the hearth, his notebook now a thick sheaf of notes, his expression one of grim determination. The discovery of the confidential documents in Trent's locked drawer had shifted the investigation, pointing to espionage as a motive for Sir Reginald Harrow's murder, yet the silk scarf, with its peony embroidery, remained an unresolved thread in the tapestry of clues. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles as she considered the pattern emerging from the chaos, the coded letter warning of leaks to Gloria, the gold-tipped cigarette stub in the courtyard, the lavender scent linking Lady Eleanor's parlour to the crime scene, the stained rag in the garage, and Madame Dubois's violet scarf all were fragments of a truth that was now tantalizingly close. The confrontation had cracked Trent's composure, but Miss Marple knew that a confession, like a poorly knit stitch, could unravel under pressure. She had requested one final gathering, and Crane, though skeptical of her methods, had agreed, summoning the suspects back to the library. The door opened, and the four entered, their movements betraying their unease. Colin Trent, pale and dishevelled, avoided eye contact, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Lady Eleanor, her mourning black accentuating her pallor, clutched her handkerchief, her green eyes wide with apprehension. Thomas Pike, his burly frame tense, glowered at Trent, his loyalty to Sir Reginald a palpable force. Madame Dubois, as poised as ever, adjusted her violet-embroidered scarf with a delicate hand, her hazel eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a flicker of curiosity. Crane cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the silence. We've uncovered evidence of espionage documents in Mr. Trent's possession that should never have left Sir Reginald's desk. But murder is another matter. We need the truth, and we need it now. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice gentle but commanding. Attention, indeed, Inspector. The truth is like a piece of lace. One must see the whole pattern to understand its beauty. Let us begin with the scarf. She gestured to the photograph on the table, its peony embroidery vivid in the firelight. It was chosen with care. I think, not in haste. A feminine thing, meant to mislead or to accuse. Lady Eleanor, you said it was not yours. Madame Dubois, You suggested such scarves are common in Galoria. But there is another possibility, is there not? Lady Eleanor, lips parted, her voice trembling. I've told you, it's not mine. I would never, Madame Dubois interrupted, her tone smooth. Miss Marple, you imply intent, but I assure you, I have no such scarf in my possession. Surely you don't suggest I... Miss Marple raised a hand, her smile disarming. Oh, I suggest nothing yet, madame. But let us consider Mr. Trent. You were seen in the courtyard, near the time of the murder, despite your claim to be here in the library. And those documents, dressed to Galoria, suggest a connection that Sir Reginald may have discovered. Trent's face crumpled, his voice rising in desperation. I didn't kill him. Yes, I sent information to Galoria. They offered money, more than I'd ever see as an aid. But I didn't mean for anyone to die. Pike's fists clenched, his voice a low growl. You betrayed him. Sir Reginald trusted you, and you sold him out. Crane stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Explain, Trent. What happened that night? Trent's shoulders sagged, his confession spilling out like water from a broken dam. Sir Reginald found out. He saw the documents, confronted me in his suite just before 8. He was furious, said he'd have me arrested for treason. I panicked. I grabbed the scarf, it was on the table, left from a meet. I strangled him. I didn't plan it, I swear. Lady Eleanor gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Pike's face darkened, his hands twitching as if longing to seize Trent. Madame Dubois, however, remained still, her expression unreadable, though her fingers tightened on her scarf. Miss Marple's needles lay idle, her gaze fixed on Trent. And the scarf, Mr. Trent, where did it come from? Trent swallowed, his voice barely audible. It was Madame Dubois gave it to me earlier that day. A gift, she said, for my help with the trade talks. I didn't think she didn't. No, I'd use it. Madame Dubois's eyes flashed, her composure slipping for the first time. That is absurd. I gave no such gift. If a scarf of mine was used, it was taken without my knowledge. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft but piercing. A gift or a theft. In my village, there was a young woman who left a ribbon in a shop, only to find it used to frame her for theft. Things are not always as they seem, Madame Dubois. Crane turned to the envoy, his tone sharp. Did you provide Trent with that scarf, Madame, or did he take it to cast suspicion on you? Madame Dubois's lips tightened, but she regained her poise. I provided nothing. If Mr. Trent took a scarf from my quarters, it was without my consent. I had no part in this tragedy. Miss Marple's eyes moved to Lady Eleanor, whose shock seemed genuine, and to Pike, whose fury was tempered by a flicker of relief. Lady Eleanor, she said gently, you knew nothing of your husband's suspicions, did you? His secrecy must have been a heavy burden. Lady Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes. He never told me, but I sensed something was wrong. He was so distant, always locking his papers away. I thought it was me, that I'd failed him somehow. Pike spoke up, his voice gruff, but softer now. Sir Reginald was protecting you, ma'am. He didn't want you caught up in his troubles. He was a good man. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the final threads. Trent's confession explained the murder, but the scarf's origin was still murky. Had he stolen it from Madame Dubois to deflect blame, or had she provided it, knowing its use would muddy the waters? The coded letter, the cigarette stub, the lavender scent all pointed to a web of deception. But Trent's panic seemed to confirm his guilt as the primary actor. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, rising with her knitting bag, "Mr. Confession gives us the how, but the why is clearer now. He acted to protect his secret, fearing exposure. The scarf, I believe, was taken from Lady Eleanor's collection. Her lavender scent clings to it, does it not? And used to mislead us. Madame Dubois's involvement, if any, was indirect, a matter for diplomacy rather than criminality." Crane nodded, his expression grim as he signaled to a constable waiting at the door. "Colin Trent, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Harrow. Madame Dubois will need to speak further about your communications with Trent." As Trent was led away, his head bowed, Lady Eleanor sank into her chair, her tears silent but heavy. Pike stood, his loyalty vindicated, though his face bore the weight of loss. Madame Dubois, her poise restored, inclined her head to Miss Marple, a silent acknowledgment of a game well played. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her smile serene. In St. Mary Mead, a young man once hid his theft behind a borrowed glove, thinking it would shield him. But truth, you see, has a way of shining through. As the suspects dispersed, the library fell silent, its secrets laid bare. The pattern was complete, but one final thread, the diplomatic fallout, remained for another day. Chapter 10. The final thread. The drawing room of Lady Beatrice Compton's Belgravia townhouse was a haven of warmth and comfort. Its chintz curtains drawn against the gathering dusk of a late autumn afternoon. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the tea tray, which bore a delicate porcelain pot, scones, and a small dish of raspberry jam. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual armchair, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, the pale blue shawl in her lap. Nearing completion, Lady Beatrice, her eyes bright with anticipation, poured tea with a flourish, her curiosity barely contained. "Jane, you simply must tell me everything," she said, handing Miss Marple a cup. "Colin Trent arrested, and that Galorian envoy under scrutiny. It's positively thrilling, like one of Raymond's novels, only better because it's real." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles as she sipped her tea. "It is rather like a novel, Beatrice, though I find life stories are often more tangled. The threads are all tied now, I think, but it was a near thing, as it often is with human nature." Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her silk dress rustling. "But how did you know it was Trent? And that scarf such a dreadful thing to use for murder? Was it really Lady Eleanor's?" Miss Marple set her cup down, her needles pausing as she gathered her thoughts. "The scarf was the key, you see, as I suspected from the start. Its peony embroidery, so delicate and feminine, was meant to mislead, to point us toward Lady Eleanor or Madame Dubois. But the lavender, scent faint but unmistakably, linked it to Lady Eleanor's parlour. In St. Mary Mead there was a young woman, Miss Ellis, who lost a scarf to a jealous rival, only to find it used to cast blame. I thought of her when I saw that scarf." She resumed her knitting, the soft clicking filling the silence. Colin Trent was a young man with ambition, far greater than his position allowed. He saw a chance for wealth by selling Valorian secrets to Galoria, facilitated by Madame Dubois, who may not have known the full extent of his actions. Sir Reginald, a cautious man, discovered the betrayal through that coded letter we found. He confronted Trent in his suite that night, and in a moment of panic, Trent acted using the scarf he'd taken from Lady Eleanor's collection to strangle him, hoping to shift suspicion. Lady Beatrice gasped, her hand fluttering to her throat, But why Lady Eleanor's scarf? To frame her. Precisely, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but sure. Trent knew of the tensions in the Harrows' marriage, Lady Eleanor's loneliness, Sir Reginald's secrecy. A scarf from her collection would cast doubt on her, or at least muddy the waters. As for Madame Dubois, her involvement was subtler. She provided Trent with a scarf, perhaps innocently, as a diplomatic gesture, but her violet-embroidered one was too similar to be coincidence. I suspect she knew of his dealings, but not his desperation. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. And Mr. Pike, he seemed so loyal, but I thought, perhaps. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking steadily. Mr. Pike was loyal, Beatrice, almost to a fault. His unease in the garage, that stained rag, those were signs of a man who saw more than he let on. He suspected Trent's disloyalty, I think, but had no proof until the end. His anger at the confrontation was genuine, born of devotion to Sir Reginald. She paused, her gaze drifting to the fire. The cigarette stub in the courtyard, with its gold filter tip, was another clue. It matched the one in Sir Reginald's case, suggesting Trent had been there, perhaps disposing of evidence. The coded letter, the locked drawer, the scuff mark by the drainpipe pointed to a man caught in a web of his own making. In my village, there was a young man, Freddie Bates, who thought he could outsmart everyone with a clever lie. But lies, you see, are like poorly knit stitches. They unravel under scrutiny. Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, delighted. Oh, Jane, you're marvellous. But what of Madame Dubois? Will she face justice? Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. That, my dear, is a matter for diplomats, not policemen. Inspector Crane will pass her name to the Foreign Office, and Gloria will deal with her in their way. Her scarf was a thread, but not the fatal one. The truth, as always, lies in the human heart, greed, fear, betrayal. Those are the strands that strangle. She finished her tea, her knitting nearly complete. In St. Mary Mead, we had a saying, "The truth is like a garden, it needs tending, but it always blooms in time." The embassy's silence is broken now, and Sir Reginald's secrets are laid bare. Lady Beatrice sighed, leaning back in her chair. You make it sound so simple, Jane, but I'd never have seen it. Miss Marple's needles clicked a final time, and she folded the shawl, its pattern intricate and complete. It's never simple, Beatrice, but patience and a little attention to the small things will always show the way. As the fire burned low, Miss Marple gathered her knitting bag, her mind already turning to the quiet of St. Mary Mead. The embassy's secrets were unravelled, its pattern revealed, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of a task well done. The final thread was tied, and the tapestry, though stained with tragedy, was whole at last.